You're listening to the Economics and Country Risk podcast from S&P Global Market Intelligence. In each episode, our experts will provide you with the where, how, and when to make decisions that transform your business.
This episode will provide you with a deep dive into the political, governance, and policy changes expected at the start of 2023, following a significant elective conference for South Africa's ruling ANC party. And now, 10 minutes with our expert.
My name is Langelihle Malimela, and I'm in charge of country risk for sub-Saharan Africa. South Africa is one of several countries that I cover, along with a team of experts based here in South Africa as well as in London. The theme of my brief presentation today really is shuffling the deck, and I want to put really into focus some of the political and governance and policy changes that we are expecting now at the beginning of 2023 in the wake of a very important conference for the ruling ANC, in which obviously President Cyril Ramaphosa emerged victorious, at least in terms of the president's role within the party, and what that means really for some of the key issues and concurrent crises, if we could refer to them as that South Africa is experiencing at the moment. I think that the place to start is the NEC conference itself and what transpired there and what we at S&P Global Market Intelligence think this is going to mean from a policy point of view. Obviously, the ANC had its key elective conference in December, which has come and gone. And aside from voting for positions, the president and deputy president, there was obviously the election of a new National Executive Committee of the ANC. And the election of the National Executive Committee of the ANC is very important. The National Executive Committee is the highest decision-making body of the party between conferences. It is highly influential, and we have seen in the past, certainly we saw between 2017 and 2022, how this body was effectively split between supporters of previous President Jacob Zuma and those of President Ramaphosa. And that division went all the way up into the national officials of the ANC, what people refer to as the top six, which is now obviously the top seven with the addition of an additional deputy secretary general within the party. We saw, and we've all known, the extent to which someone like Ace Magashule, key factor in that internal resistance to the reforms which the Ramaphosa presidency promised to bring, and was almost that internal proxy for a radical economic transformation faction of the party whose almost ideological sort of figurehead was the former President Jacob Zuma. But now we're in a moment post the most recent conference where even Ace Magashule has been removed, and he is no longer really an important factor within the party. And that is important. It's important to the shifting dynamics, the shifting alliances within the party, and how all this will ultimately spill over into key policy areas. But Magashule's demise as a key political figure was perhaps emphasized or highlighted by the election of Mxolisi Dukwana 2 or maybe 3 weeks ago now as the chairperson of the ANC in Free State Province. That's very important. Where Dukwana, that is, defeated the premier of the province, Sisi Ntombela, who's an important Magashule ally in the race for the chairpersonship of the ANC in that province. And it does look like Dukwana will now very likely take up or replace her as premier of the Free State Province. And I'm emphasizing that to highlight the fact that this dichotomy that we've known of a Cyril Ramaphosa supporting reformist wing of the party as against a sort of Zuma radical economic transformation wing of the party, that is something of the past, and that you have a new set of alliances, a new set of concerns around which key political figures will emerge and which will be actors that then have an important bearing on policy. We saw the election of the National Working Committee again about 2 weeks ago of the ANC. We've seen the extent to which, again, this is dominated by allies of the president, of President Ramaphosa. Now, the National Working Committee doesn't necessarily take decisions for the party, but it drives the NEC's work, and through it, Ramaphosa can really have significant control of the inner workings of the party. So the extent to which Ramaphosa would probably have to worry about personalities and managing his own policy agenda so that he can try to keep the party united, that all appears to be less of a factor than it was before. But with all that said, we can't set our sights too high in terms of what key policy changes this can imply. And obviously a major focus where this is concerned is really the issue around energy, which is really the main focus of my comments today for a number of reasons. The reality is that the current Minister of Minerals and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, has been angling for greater control over Eskom for a very long time. We know historically that Gwede Mantashe is somebody who comes from the unions, comes from organized labor within the mining sector. He comes from the National Union of Mine Workers, as does the president himself. But there are entrenched interests within this sector, all up and down the value chain, where the supply of coal and so on, where the coal industry is concerned, which Mantashe strongly represents within the ANC. The coal sort of lobby and mining, very strong, and that is something that is not going to change overnight. So he remains a key figure, and he's somebody who's been pilloried lately. Some of the comments he's made, he is to a large extent the focus of this sort of anger that arises out of the crippling load shedding that we're experiencing. But he remains a very important figure, and he's a representative of key interests within the party, like I say, which will not dissipate overnight. We know that the coal mining sector, the black economic transformation of the economy, which is a major program of the ANC after 1994, this is the one area where this whole ideology maybe has a measure of success, where you have black ownership of assets and participation in the economy. And so these are important factors, whether we like it or not, even in 2023, that help to drive the balance of power in terms of decision-making of what will happen within Eskom. Andre de Ruyter's resignation, Jan Oberholzer's retirement, really represents something of a win for Gwede Mantashe. For us, it signals a separation, we think, in terms of the policy outlook between what is likely and what is possible in the short term, i.e. pre-2024 elections, and what is possible or likely in the medium term, in other words, after those elections. But even if we take someone like Gwede Mantashe out of the picture, it seems that, according to our sources, there's an acknowledgement by the president that the split, the equivocation, the importance, the significance he's lent to renewables, that discussion, phasing away coal, etc., that these are perhaps something of a problem in terms of policy clarity, and that we're likely to see a much more focus, and we've seen the president's utterances begin to change in terms of him acknowledging the importance of coal within South Africa's energy mix in the short term and going forward. And so you can start to see how his utterances change. And we think that this means that in the short term, we're likely to see someone like Mantashe again be given significant more control, more space to try and figure out the problems. And we think that we'll hear leadership talk more about the importance and the significance of coal, and certainly gas as well, within the energy mix, to try and solve the problems in the short term. And I think that appears to accept that the procurement changes, the overhaul, the anti-corruption drive, the really good work that Andre de Ruyter has done may in the short term, however, be adding to the pain that is being experienced in terms of security of supply. And that's underlined by the sort of record number of, I think it's 205 days is the number that's been bandied about, of load shedding that we've had over the past 12 months. But more deeper than that, we're seeing that Eskom's problem was not simply a Gupta state capture issue with Brian Molefe and a far more profound problem. That is that of entrenched interests, a very complex system and web of interests. And Eskom has almost always played this role of being this vehicle of empowerment, being this vehicle of building up new ownership and influence within mining, within the coal industry. And that sort of web of interests is very difficult to try and navigate whilst you're trying to deal with a problem as complex and as deep-seated as the current electricity crisis. But through it all, what we are seeing is that Gwede Mantashe is important to the president. He remains pivotal. And even where Ramaphosa may have wanted to, say, remove Mantashe, keep the current structure, double down on coal, expedite the gas, power ships, procurement, and so on, politically it's not really something that's likely. And that is because of the importance of Mantashe as an important power broker. It's very unlikely the president would have done as well in December without Mantashe's support. And let's not forget that the Phala issue, although Parliament threw out the judicial report that was submitted in late last year, that there is a low likelihood of criminal charges still emanating from the investigations that are going into Phala-Phala, which threatens the president's political future. And that's very important. And so that is why someone like Mantashe, who's chairperson of the ANC, remains very important. I think that Pravin Gordhan is somebody that's probably going to make way. There are obviously talks of doing away with the public enterprises altogether. That's unlikely to be something that takes place in the short term, but probably after the next elections, with the state-owned enterprises moving to the ministries where they're aligned. But Gordhan is not somebody who's managed to retain a seat within the National Executive Council of the ANC anyway. And so, yes, you're going to see a new crop of leaders. We've seen Sihle Zikalala come into Parliament. Obviously, Paul Mott is coming into Parliament. New young leaders, some from KZN and elsewhere, coming into Parliament, likely in preparation for cabinet positions. And so there is that shift. But like I'm saying, in a key area like energy, really for the time being, the massive sort of reforms and overhauls that many have been fighting for are probably not going to materialize. There's no doubt when we look ahead at the election that the ANC is in trouble for obvious reasons, not least the power crisis itself and the cost of living crisis more generally, which affects other parts of the world as well. But the ANC will get a lot of mileage out of the new leadership that it has elected. And so we ought not to get carried away when we look at the picture and how dire things are to think that the ANC will be well below 50% in the coming elections and so on. I wouldn't call that election. But just to say that someone like Fikile Mbalula is a very, very good, very energetic. Now, he's been head of ANC elections for a long time. He will do very well in terms of preparing the African National Congress for the elections. Let's not forget as well that the ANC does much better in its national elections than it does in municipal elections. So we cannot, again, be distracted by what's been happening at the municipal level, because what you tend to find, and I've made this comment before, that when it comes to municipal candidates, when an ANC constituencies don't get their preferred candidates for wards and so on, they tend to not vote altogether. And that affects the ANC's performance at a municipal level. Whereas at the national level, the ANC is very articulate and very clear when it comes to the larger issues around land reform, around black economic empowerment, those things that galvanize voters. But also, when looking at elections and thinking about possible outcomes, we need to pay attention to really who is going to take up that space if the ANC is losing votes, particularly in urban areas. Are the other political parties well positioned to take advantage of that, or are they not? And we've seen that perhaps the Democratic Alliance, for example, is stuck in and around that 20-21% area and perhaps has reached a ceiling, and the EFF likewise into 12 to 13% areas. Whilst a party like the Inkatha Freedom Party will probably gain in areas like KwaZulu-Natal because of the sort of falling away in political influence of the Zuma family and so on, it's not always a case of how the ANC is doing that we can measure what's likely to happen in the national elections. We need to think about, are the other political parties positioned to take advantage? And we've seen that has not been the case in the past. Voter apathy is also another massive issue that tends to affect everyone and probably affects the sort of opposition parties more than it affects the ANC because of how well the ANC does in the urban areas. So those are the types of things that one needs to think about when looking at the elections next year and what's likely to happen. Yes, the ANC is in trouble, but there are these mitigating factors to think about. As we've seen in the past in the run-up to elections, and we expect this year for labour strikes to become much more frequent, particularly in the later stages of the year. We've seen already the tension coming out of the medium-term budget policy statement and the finance minister's desire to limit wage increases to 3% over the medium term, and that is already very contentious, particularly given the inflation outlook. And we think that you're likely to see an escalation in labour strikes, particularly public sector labour strikes, but also in the mining sector as well. In general, violent protests, obviously when we talk about violent protests in this post-July 2021 moment, that tends to be the bar. We don't think that South Africa is likely to see anything on that scale in the current outlook. You're unlikely to see anything of that scale or that level of violence, but we are likely to see occasional protests, violent protests around key triggers like xenophobia, university fees and things like that, underpinned by general cost of living crisis and the difficulty that people are having in terms of the prices of food and fuel in general.
Thank you for listening to the Economics and Country Risk podcast. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode.